Hello, welcome to FX PhD. My name is Matt Leonard and this is class number 6 of Maya Fundamentals, mya222, and this is Look Dev and Lighting. So we're going to be looking at the new hypershader in this class. So let's get straight into things. So you can see I've loaded up Maya. This is Maya 2016 and it's Service Pack 2, so I've upgraded since our last class. And what we're going to do is we're just going to load in the scene we're going to be using this week. And we basically want to go to class 6. And we are looking for class 601, which is a very basic scene. We're just going to be focusing on a basic asset this week, which is going to be our teapot. Okay, so there you can see it. If I go to my render settings, you can see that it's going to be rendering with Mental Ray. This will probably be the last class we use Mental Ray. From then, we're going to be moving into RenderMan. We have got the quality set to 0.5, and we've got our filtering set to 2.8 for the X and Y. So if we go ahead and render this, you'll see what we get. Now on top of our teapot, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to very quickly make just a simple ground plane. I'm just going to be using the hotbox, which you can get to by pressing the space bar. So I'm going to go to create, I'm going to make a polygon plane, and I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to make it about 25, and I'm going to turn off my grid here. I can also turn off my grid by going to show, and right at the bottom is grid. And both of these are going to end up with the same shader on, which you can see is Lambert 1 for both the teapot and for the grid itself. And it's going to be Lambert 1 that we're going to be adjusting and changing. Now also note, when I render this, if we just go ahead and just render it one more time, that we're not really getting any shadows. And that's because we're just using the very basic light that comes with this. So the reason why we're getting light, and we've talked about this in previous classes, is due to the fact that we have under the common section this enable default light. When I turn this off and we render, we then don't get any light at all, and we're just going to get black. Okay, so I'm going to leave this on for the time being, but the moment we start putting lights in this is going to kind of deactivate itself, because once it has some lights, it knows it doesn't need to render anything. So I'm going to go with somewhere like that as my view. It's bound to change, so I'm going to come to view and create camera from view, and then I'm going to make sure I select my camera, and I'm just going to call it camera main, just so we know what that is. And then I'm going to lock the translate and rotate. So I'm going to right click and come to lock selected. So now we can't mess with this. If we come back to the perspective, we can, but then if we come back to panels, we can come to the camera main, and I can always get back to this. Okay, so we're ready to go. So let's load up the hypershader. Now in the past, you're probably familiar with coming to Windows, Render Editors, and the hypershader. You can see that it's now in green. Now the reason why it's green is because I've set that new tools have this green highlight. Makes it really easy for you to quickly look through menus and see, okay, so the profiler is new. If I come into some of these other menus, you may eventually discover more tools that are new. Now, a lot of these obviously aren't, but we do have things like our delta mesh here. We've got a contour stretch under UVs. So really helpful to have this on. It's on by default, and I like to leave it on. So that was the old traditional way. What they've now done is they've added this button right at the end of the render buttons that we have. So we know this is our show last render, this is our render button, this is our IPR render, this is our render globals or render settings, and this now is our display hypershader window. So if I click on that, it's immediately going to call it up, and there we have it. So what we have here in the new hypershader is a new kind of look development tool, and it's really useful. It takes all the things that you need for look development and brings them all into one place for the first time. So you can do things like build your shaders in a node editing interface, and that enables you to do things like solo a single node, so you can just look at that node. You can create custom layouts of what we've got here. You can edit your material using the editor properties window, which is kind of part of the attribute editor, which they've now brought into the Hyper shader. You can work with multiple shading graphs simultaneously, and it really enables you to see what you're doing very quickly. So what we have is a number of sections. Firstly, up here we have a toolbar here, and this enables you to do a whole bunch of things. So you can basically determine what's going to work, whether it's going to render, whether you're going to pause it, what size all these kind of nodes are that we're seeing here, these swatches, a whole bunch of different things. Then we have this section, which is the material view, and this basically is used for actually previewing your material. So in the past we've obviously had just these little swatches. Now we have something much more sophisticated. Then underneath that we have our properties editor, and this is where you're going to do all of the work. This is where we're going to be adjusting the properties of the textures, the shaders, etc. Over on this side we have our normal kind of list of nodes that we can use and are visible. Over here we have our categories and then list of nodes that we can use, and then right at the bottom here you can see we actually have the area where we build our shaders, and this enables you to have multiple tabs, so you can actually create groups of shaders that are easily accessible, so you don't have to have all your shaders all bundled together if you're going to make a few. So let's begin by just doing some basic tests so you get the feel of how things work. So this one that's untitled, I'm just going to call it red, and it's going to be an mya material X, so I may just call it red plastic just for the time being. And what I want to use is, I don't want Maya, unfortunately we don't want RenderMan at the moment, but we are going to come to material, and I'm going to choose the mya material X here. Now the minute I click this, watch what happens. It loads it here into our browser, it loads it here into our graph section, and it immediately gives you a window here that actually shows you a really nice render of what we're getting. Now if I come back and click here you can see all of the kind of attributes that are available, and up here at the top we can adjust things like the exposure, the gamma, and even what kind of lookup table or gamma correction you're having for the view. So I'm going to move all this across somewhere like there, just so we've got a little bit more room with what's going on up here. Now we have some interesting things here that enable you to view different types of geometry to see how the light and how the shaders are affecting things. So for instance, I can grab some cloth. We get this really nice cloth image. We could grab a teapot, not quite the Utah teapot, but a teapot nevertheless. We could choose an ocean. We could choose an ocean with a splash, which is really nice. We can have a glass fill, a glass splash, and a sphere and a plane. So the one I really like is the shader ball itself. I find this really nice and easy to use. Now let's first of all talk about how we can customize this. Basically this is a kind of a dock undock system, and you can move things around and put them really wherever you want. You can also choose from this window menu other things that aren't available in the kind of the default setup. So for instance, if I wanted the material view to be a little bit larger, I could potentially grab it, move it to the side, and just drop it in here. And I could budge all this across, and you can see you now have a really large version. If I want to grab it and move it back, I grab the dotted line, slide it into this section and release it. If I want to add something new, let's say I want the UV editor. First of all, it comes in as like a little floating window, which is really useful. I can very easily just pick it up and dock it, and you can see now I have my UV editor above my properties panel and below my material view. If I want to get rid of it, I can click here and this will pop it back out, drop it into another section, or I could get rid of it completely just by hitting the X. Now sometimes this gets a little bit jammed and you need to kind of resize the window just to let it kind of reorganize itself. There we go. So it's really easy to change things and adjust kind of how things are laid out. You can also take things like you can add bins, you can actually add a viewport. So I could grab my viewport and I could choose to say drop that in here. So let's drop it in, say, let's put it in there for the time being. So you can see this actually now gives me a 3D viewport that I can navigate around in. If I drop back into my perspective view, okay. Now if we just get rid of the viewport and focus for a moment on our browser, this button here basically pauses the material and texture generation in our viewport, just turns off the swatch from being generated. So that's pretty straightforward. Next up we have this button that basically shows these as icons or as just lines of text. So I can show icons or lines of text. I can adjust how big they are based on the size here. I can sort by name, I can sort by type, sort by time, or I can sort in reverse order. So if I put it on reverse order, S starts because I'm sorting by name. If I put this back on, then Lambert obviously is the first letter that we've got there. Then we have this section here, which is our filters. So this enables me to basically search for only certain things. So if I search for Lambert and star, I'm obviously going to get anything with Lambert and then something underneath and then something after it. And then this button basically indicates that either the text filter or the last one to be shown in the menu is used. Okay, so if I click that, it just goes back to kind of clearing this. Okay, I can then click this show button and I can show objects based on materials, whether they be mental ray. I can invert the showing, show all those kind of things. Okay, but most of the time I'm just going to clear the menu and keep it as is. Okay, so there's our Lambert. And because this is selected, now we see it here. If I was to come in and select the material X, that will now jump across and show us that rendering here as well. So it makes it very easy just to click between each one and it quickly shows you what's going on. Now another thing that's really useful is under the Windows menu is this bin. So I'm going to bring this over and I'm just going to drop it in, let's say here. I can get it to drop in. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricksy. There, let's drop it in there and we'll bring this back up. Now this basically is a master bin that contains all the materials, and then we can add and name any number of bins afterwards. So let's say I want to create a bin and I'm just going to call it, say, grey shaders. And if I click on it, you can see there's currently nothing in it. But what I can do is I can come back, I can grab, say, these, middle drag into this bin, and now when I click on it, you can see that we now get these particular shaders that I had selected inside the bin. If I want to delete something from here, I can right click and I can say remove selected. So I can remove anything I want. Again, if I come back to my master material, select something, I can then again right click on the new bin and I can add it if I want to. So you can do remove and add, or you can middle drag to add. But you're going to need to come in here always to remove. You can also do things like duplicate, empty it completely, so I can get rid of it and I can delete it. So a whole bunch of quite useful things we can do there with bins. I'm going to probably just leave this open here if I want to use it later. These buttons at the top basically enable you to create an empty bin, a bin from the selected. So with this selected, it'll make me a new bin. I can give it a name, again, grey shaders, and you can see that's just going to make a new bin with this already in it. And then this button here basically selects unsorted content if I want to do that. But for the time being, I'm just going to go in and delete this one. Now, underneath that, we have our main kind of work area. This is where all our nodes are. And these nodes are basically what form the shader itself. So as I click on each of these, we're actually going to end up with different things being displayed here. So for instance, say we want to add a checkerboard into, say, the diffuse color. What I can do is in here, I can do tab and I can begin to type what I'm looking for. So I want checker and I want it just as a straightforward texture. I don't want it as a stencil and I don't want to be able to project it onto something. I just want it as a straightforward texture. So I choose it, press enter, and it adds a little bit more to my graph. Now you can see as I select things, we're actually getting a view of that particular node that's available. So if I come back here, we're just seeing the grey. If I want to connect this in, I can connect the out color. So I click and drag. And then as I come over here, you can see that it's given me the option of where I can put it. So I could put it in the diffuse, the reflection color, the refraction color, or various other attributes. Now, you may ask, why are some of them disappearing? They're disappearing because they are not available when I'm using this particular output. Now, if I open this up, you can see that here, under the out color, we have red, green, and blue. So these are single values. So if I choose a single value, you can see that where we had some disappeared, they now reappear. So we could put this into the weight or the roughness. But if we use 3 values altogether, RGB, we only get things that require that RGB. Now if you hover, you can see that it does show you what's there, but it's still grayed out. So you could potentially take the red and add it, and then the green, and then the blue, which is a little bit pointless. So I'm just going to come in and I can just pull these off. So you just left click and drag off. Or I could just take the whole thing, the whole of the out color, and put it straight into the diffuse. And you can see now, we actually see with this selected, that showing us up here exactly what we're getting. So if I came in now to the checker and selected it, you can see in my properties panel, the information referring to that is now available. If I come into my 2D texture, click on that, the properties of that are available. Now, if I come over to my checker and select, it goes green, showing me that I'm actually using the properties, but I'm not actually showing the output of this in the materials view. To show the output, I need to click this S button, which basically says that I'm selecting this to view in the materials view. So with this selected, I can now see what's going on. And I can do the same here with this 2D texture. If I do S, I'm really now seeing the UV information in the red and the green to show me what's going on there. Next to those, you can see I have these buttons. And what these do is these enable me to open up different parts. So I can show everything or just what's connected. So here is just the minimum. If I click once, you get 1 line, which just gives you a very small area. 2 gives me the outputs, and 3 gives me everything. So that can be really useful. And again, that works on all of them. So if I click all 3, you can see all the inputs and outputs that you may have available. If I click just once, you get it small. Twice, you get again what we had by default. And that works the same here. I tend to like just using the kind of non-selected, and that kind of gives you what it thinks is the most useful. Sometimes if you're wondering whether you can do something, then you can come in and you can bring this down to 3, and you can really then kind of get a feel for what you may be able to do with this node. Again, if I want to see the final output, I just press S, and we now see that here. Now, what would happen if we're thinking, okay, so this is a material that clearly has reflection. The reflection is on, but we're not really seeing too much to do with the reflection. How could I do that? Well, here you have this button that enables you to choose some interior and exterior color neutral that basically give you high dynamic range images that are used for lighting and for reflections. So let's choose interior color. In the background here, you're going to see the image, and then you can actually see it now reflected in our model. So if I now came into reflection and said let's turn the reflectivity down to 0.1, you can see the immediate feedback that we get of that. It's very, very quick, and you get a really nice overview of the material. So if I wanted to make it a reflectivity of 0, we now lose all reflective properties of that. We could come in and choose another one, so say an exterior color. You can see again we get another image, a neutral, which is quite nice, another exterior color, a little bit more colorful, or we could go back to an interior. And we could begin to push up that reflectivity again. And again, we will immediately see that in here. Now, if we want to, we can actually do a whole bunch of things. This really supports many attributes that you may want to adjust. So glossiness is going to make it a little bit more blurry. So if I reduce the glossiness down to 0.2, you can see all those reflections are now becoming really blurry. And it's going to take a little bit of time for this just to resolve while it kind of renders in the background. So I'm going to put it up to 0.5 and maybe drop my samples just down to 4 just to speed it up a little bit. And that will now just go ahead and continue to refine, get better and better while we're waiting. Now let's briefly return to look at the toolbar of this editor. So here we have the ability to basically show input connections. So if I choose this one and I view the input connections, we're just looking at what inputs into that. If I choose the output connections, we're now just viewing the material group which comes out of it. And if I click the input-output connections, we see everything. So that's really good. We can do things like clear the graph, which enables you to basically clear it completely. That hasn't deleted the material, it simply got rid of it out of the graph area. If I select this and come to this add selected nodes, it will then add it, and I can then come back and I can show the input connections. So I can drag this over. Now here we have the ability to basically rearrange the graph. So I can do that. So I'm just going to rearrange this a little bit neater. It's a little bit like Nuke. It doesn't always give itself the best layout. These buttons obviously represent what's going on here, and they work across the board. So if I have all these selected, I can basically adjust them all at once. If I have just a couple of them selected, it just affects those ones. Nothing selected, it adjusts all of them as if they were all selected. Clicking here basically now opens up this section where you can basically come in and you can search for a specific attribute. So I can go to, say, diffuse, and it's now only going to show me the diffuse inputs based on this word. Okay, so that can be really useful. Next one across basically toggles the icon view. So if you think this is a little bit small, we can toggle it so they all appear bigger, which I quite like. I like to be able to see this. You can switch on a grid, and you can even snap to grid. So if you're like me and you like things to be kind of neat, you can set this so that everything kind of appears neat. I'll leave that on for the time being. Next one, of course, basically restores the last closed tab. So if you have a number of tabs, it will restore it. And then again, you have your normal search here across everything that you can use. And then the ability to basically go back to the last one. Same as what we had up here. Okay, you can do all the normal navigation. So Alt and middle click, right click, and obviously left click, which would be tumble, doesn't work because you can't tumble in a 2D view. Okay, so that are the controls that we have here, which are really useful. Now, in order to actually assign one of these materials directly onto the geometry, it's pretty straightforward. Let's just bring this over so we actually have a bit of room and just select the teapot. We can obviously right click and just say assign existing material, which is going to do it. We could, if we know our teapot is selected, we can obviously go to the swatch up here, right click, and we can say assign material to selection, or we can just middle drag it onto the texture, or we can just middle drag it onto the geometry itself. Okay, just standard things. We've talked about this many times, so don't really need to go over it. Now, returning briefly to our material view, we talked about these different attributes. We talked about these different backgrounds we can use. We can also add a new one if you have your own. So I can come in here and I can say add, and I can give it a name. So I'm going to say custom, and then it's going to ask me for an image file here. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to go ahead and find from my list of things a Puzzlewood small image and load that in, save and close. And now when I select that, it should load up that image, and you can see there it is. There's my custom image added in, and you can see this is then taking on all of the lighting and reflection attributes based off of that image. So I'm going to return back to one of the default ones. Now if I come down and click add again, you can see that where it has custom, I could actually go ahead and delete it, and then I'm back to needing to create any new ones I like. So I'm just going to go ahead and go with that exterior, or rather interior again. So you can add in your own ones that fit with your shows, or with your own HDRs that you're going to be using for lighting, etc., which makes it really nice to keep everything roughly the same in our development of our shaders along with the actual render setup itself. So let's look at how we can actually create a shader from scratch. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to make this untitled tab. I'm going to click and I'm going to make an mya material X. Let's now make a ramp. So just a textured ramp here. You can see this has an out color and an out alpha. And I'm also going to make, say, a noise. And bring those to here. Give ourselves a little bit more space. You can also do a whole bunch of things like maths. So we could do like a multiply divide. We may want to use that. So what we can from here do is we can basically feed in each one of these. So the out color could come into the input 1, and the out color of the noise could come into input 2. Okay, so now we have these two different types of nodes, one that's making noise and one that's just going to be making a ramp, and they're both feeding into our node here. And if we click, we can see the output of what we're getting. So my ramp, I'm just going to adjust. So let's select this, and let's just make it, say, a red color. Kind of a darkish red. And I'm going to add in here kind of an orangey color. Something like that. And with my noise, let's make sure I can see that. And I'm just going to adjust this a little bit. So let's just bring the threshold up and the amplitude down a little bit. This down, this maybe up just a tiny bit, something like that. And let's come across to here, and let's just set the repeat to maybe 15 and 15, something like that. Let's come back and have a look at what that gives us. So that's going to give us something like that, which is quite nice. Okay, next up, I'm going to bring in an image. I can just left click that off of my desktop and just drop it in. See, it immediately gives me that image here, and if I click on it, you can actually see what that image is looking like. Now I think at this point I'm going to just make these a little bit bigger. So I'm going to increase my swatches for all of these. So let's just go ahead and select everything in the graph and increase them. And let's just move this up a little bit, give ourselves a little bit of space. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and make another noise. Yeah, let's make that a little bit bigger as well. And I'm going to connect this noise after I've adjusted it. So let's go with a purling noise and just make a few changes. Somewhere like that seems to work. And I'm going to make another multiply divide node. And we're going to feed these into that. So output of our color and our noise. And we can see what that's going to look like. That's going to give us this. And then the final thing I want to do is just make a ramp. Again, give ourselves a little bit more space. And I'm going to do another multiply divide. And I want to take the output of this and this into here. And that's going to give me this. Now if I wanted to, I can obviously come into this and I could choose to make some changes. So I've got my input values. I could do a multiply, divide, power, which I quite like, which is probably what I'm going to go with, or no operation. Maybe divide, and then if I see this, that's what we're going to be getting. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to take all of these and I want to drag this over here. So what I want to do now is make a layered texture. And move this over here. Sometimes you can see this kind of doesn't end up where your mouse is. It kind of goes a bit squirrely, a bit weird. But you can just keep on working with it. And what we want to do is we want to take our input here. So we have two inputs. And I'm going to take this as one. Let's just open this up. So output into here. And then this one output into here. And then this is all going to give us this image. Now you can see as we adjust this, we begin to see through to what is underneath. And I can actually drive this based on the alpha of something. So for instance, if I made a noise, and let's just adjust this to say wispy and get this roughly where we'd like it. Somewhere like there is quite nice. This can now be used to actually drive this. So we've got our input 0 and 1, and we want to drive the alpha. So we come into here and we can just take the color, or rather just the red of the color, into the alpha. Now you can see where that pattern is, we're beginning to see through, which is really nice. And then as we adjust this, you can see we're getting different results. So we can go with something that just has a bit of texture, something like that. Maybe just adjust the frequency a little bit and the ratio. Pretty happy with that. Now all of this can now be fed directly into here. So out color into the diffuse. And then if we view that, there is what we're getting. And we could also, if we fancy, take some of this. So let's see what we've got here. That would be quite nice. We could use that to actually drive, say, well, let's just take one of them and use it to drive, say, the reflection amount. So let's just see which one it is. So we want to drive the reflectivity color. So let's take all of that and drive the color itself. Select it so we can see it. Now we're getting a really nice result. Okay, so to clean all this up, I can right click on this node and graph network, and you can see that tidies up all your nodes really nicely, and that gives you a really nice layout. You may choose to come in and just make a few adjustments just to try and line up all the similar nodes. I quite like doing that just so I can clearly see what's going on. But that is our really nice node tree that gives us this shader that we have here. Now, if you have any questions about any of this, please put them in the forums. We've obviously just kind of brushed over the surface of everything, but you should have a really good idea as to how things work inside this new hypershader. I would love to see you building some shaders of your own. Obviously there's many nodes that you can choose from, so choose the ones that you're familiar with. If you're unfamiliar with many of them, have a look in the user manual of Maya, because it explains what all the nodes do. We could obviously do an entire course on the nodes, but we're just going to use the ones that are relevant for what we want to look at and study. But please make some shaders and show me your layout of your nodes and your material view as well, just so I can kind of see what you're doing. And if you want to assign those to your geometry, that would be great as well, just so I can see what's going on there. So until next week, any questions as always, please put them in the forums, and we will be beginning our next major project next week in week 7. So until then, this has been Matt Leonard for FX PhD.